Okay. This is Ruth Tanner, and it is June 10th, 1990, and we're interviewing Erna Preis. Erna, let's talk a little bit about life in Leheim. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Leheim,
Correct.
Germany. Tell me what the town was like, what it was like for you as a Jew in the town, that sort of thing.
Well, basically, I was born in the small town of Leheim. We lived there till 1925. Then we moved in another small town, about 1,200 people. And the town, Germany is different than the United States. Most people were of the Protestant faith. There were maybe 9 to 10 Jewish families living in the town. And we also had a small synagogue. And generally, we had a wonderful relationship with all our neighbors. And in a small town, you know just everyone. But when we moved 1925, I went to a private school. School in Europe is approximately 8 years, public school. If you wanted a better education, you had to pay for. So I went to what they call, we call that a Realschule. It was mostly for boys, but they took a small number of girls there too. And after I graduated, I went into a business school, to get a profession. Well, as I said, in the small town, basically, people were mostly farmers. And it is different in Europe. The farm, the people live next door to each other, but the farm is outside of the little town. So it was a real nice living there, and also very congenial. And when I went to public school, there was never any problem. But in 1933, fascism came. And as it was, and it looked like all your neighbors, everyone, you felt like you were totally isolated.
These people who had previously been friendly and
Yes.
congenial with you?
Yes, and we had a neighbor, she said one time to my mother's name was Paula. Now, Paula, if I want to be evil, I can say to the fascists now, you said, they are, let's see, you talked about them, or you said this or that. There would be no trial, you would wind up in prison. With other words, everything changed so rapidly. There was such a propaganda against the Jewish people, where I sometimes felt even nice and good Christian people got sort of afraid. And I remember one day, there stood a lot of young people in front of our house with guns and told the people not to come to us from the small town. And
to your father's business?
Yeah, right. Just don't come. And there was and the papers were just sort of full with propaganda, and they talked about, of course, who isn't with us, the fascist, is against us. Then they started off, of course, the world doesn't realize that fascism and communism are they're both evil. One is to the right and the other is to the left. People have no choice of expression. People are living in constant fear. And if you, for instance, were a Democrat and you didn't agree with this, you wind up in slave labor camp like everybody else. And all at once, even in schools, everything was controlled. What's supposed to be taught, what's supposed to be said. But in general, the Jewish people were to blame just for everything.
Can you remember a specific instance that happened to you that was anti-Semitic?
Yes, I remember that. I lived in the little town, and there was a little dance, on a Saturday evening, and I was a Christian young man. We went to school together, and we were friendly. It wasn't in anything. All at once at the dance, they called out, "Jews not allowed." So I remember trembling. I went out, he brought me home, and they called him all kinds of names then, because he was kind enough, or decent, let's say, and and there were so many incidents which really happened to people, which you really, like I wanted to say, one day I was, then I took a job in the city in an office, and I see these men coming in the big trucks and just smashing the windows in Jewish businesses, just everywhere. That was the beginning. That was as early as 1933, And then, as we were decent, God-fearing people. And whenever there was something going on, like in the little town, where you needed to give something, we were always there. It didn't make any difference whether people were Christian or Jewish. People lived in harmony, I should say. Well, when I saw that then in the town, what really was going on, and one day I walked home from work, and I see oodles and oodles of people going to this big sports arena, and there Hitler spoke. And I had seen such a fanatic people. I said, what is going wrong? How can one turn overnight? I mean, there were screams, and the people raised their arms, and I just got utterly afraid even walking by. And the brown shirts stood outside. And so you were never sure whether when you went someplace, somebody might come up and ask you directly, are you a Jew? Well, if you said yes, you don't know where you would have winded up. You need no provocation, absolutely nothing. And then what actually really happened, which was when we decided to come, I had a little brother, and he was handicapped. And he was burned alive. They put him, all these kids, like when somebody, let's say a child would be retarded or something, they said they want a race. The race shouldn't have any mixture of any nationalities or anything else. So if someone was handicapped, they put gasoline on, put him in a barn, and lit the barn and burned the kids alive.
Do you mean your brother was in like an institution, and
Well,
all
yes,
of the children were?
Yeah, he had, when he was a young boy, about 3 or 4, he had some kind of, like what would I call it? We called it cripple, something like the flu. And that down in the little town, there was no doctor, there was no one. And so he lost his speech. See, that affected his speaking. And he was in a special school for children. And one day they got there, the Nazis, of course, they talked, the race got to be clean. You got to have blonde eyes, and you got to have blue eyes and blonde hair, and all those things.
And nothing defective, no. Not
That's
defective.
right, but that didn't mean only for Jewish children. That meant others too. The gypsies and all kinds of people which had handicaps. They were in their way.
How did your family find out about what happened to your brother?
Well, strangely enough, we had gotten a letter. He was in the city from a relative who wrote what actually had happened.
And your parents were never notified that he had died?
No, No, there wasn't such a thing. They snatched people from right, left, and it didn't make any difference. You need only maybe to voice your opinion. You could have get snatched away. But you have to understand, it took Hitler maybe 3 to 4 years to get organized. When he came in all these other countries, he had already so much propaganda and so much was going on where that was just like lightning. They rounded the people up. Now my father, of course, didn't have any means of support. As I said, we were people who had a little small acreage. Mm-hmm. And we blended our own food. We had our own kettle. And it was just like my father couldn't go to the barber where he had been going all these years because Jews were not allowed. And so then my sister and I decided we are leaving. We're coming to the United States.
How old were you then?
I was 20.
And your sister?
Yeah. She was 19. Right. But in now coming back to something in the business which I worked, that became Aryanized. That's other word. The fascists came and put someone in this business to run this business. And all the Jewish people lost their jobs right then and there. And you had no leg to stand on. You had no place to go, no one to talk to. And the Jewish community, many of the Jewish people mostly lived in small towns. But Europe is different. I could walk from one little town to the other in 20 minutes.
It'd be like living in a suburb and going to another one.
Right. And you know, you had no transportation. People had no cars or anything like that. And of course, as I said, since I left fairly early, and that was just the beginning. But you could, every day in the paper, you could read all the stories, you know. And one time, there was a farmer my father did business with, and we were very friendly. They had once a big fire, and we let their cows stay at our little acreage, our little farm which we had. And one day, they were what you call the youngers, the right wing. Germany, it was different. He was very extremely wealthy. He never worked on his land, and maybe Polish workers or German workers worked the land. And one day he said, you know, I am a younger, and that meant right wing, you know, they go back to the history of Germany. If we should get to rule Germany, we will cut the throats of all the Jewish people in Germany. And you know, my father fought in the First World War as a German soldier for 4 years for his country, won honorable some kind of cross for his country, was 2 years soldier inactive. That meant inactive, you know, the army was requisition. And he came home and I said, Mr. Rothman said that to me today, but how can anyone, the loyalty and all how I fought for my country, how can anyone think that way? You know, we didn't realize that that can happen every place, any place. You need to say it long enough. I could say something. This country, of course, is made up of all kinds of nationalities, all people, all creed, all color, all religions. I could point out someone, let's say the Italian people. I keep saying it long enough, you will find enough followers. So at this time, we didn't realize really. But there was another question. The world was totally silent. We didn't know what to do, where to go. And there was a quota system in the United States. if you were German, there was a certain, but if you happened to be Polish or Hungarian, which was the East in Germany, the quota was so low where you couldn't get the entry visa.
You mentioned that you and your sister Lily decided to leave when you were 20 and she was 19. What happened then? How did you go about
Well, my family,
leaving?
part of my family had settled in Nashville. And they came out to see the family and see what was going on.
Is this the May family?
Yeah, right. And see what's going on. And and my mother had a cousin, and he said, dark days for the Jewish people will come. We don't believe it, you know. If we had read Hitler's book Mein Kampf, everybody who didn't believe like they thought they should believe was in their way. Now, it was easy to call you a Bolshevik whether you have been one or not. And there was so much uncertainty, people losing their job. So we talked that over with our family, and I never forget what my mother said. She said, I always been thinking there is a future for my children in Germany. After all, we were very German. That I must say, that was our country. And like, this is my country, America, like I'm very American. This is my country. I always thought my children had a future here, but maybe you are the forebearers. Who knows what is coming, what I see. But if you have made a decision, you want to go, one alone cannot go. You and your sister have to go together if we should never get out, so you have each other. See, there was quite a difference in age. My sister and I were born before the First World War, and the rest of my
children,
my two brothers and my sister were born after the First World War. But when you really come back to the history of Germany, one doesn't understand. We do not understand world history, what it really was. Germany always started a war. In 1870-71, there was a war against France. 1940 was another war. Then came the Second World War. So Germany always was the originator. And the First World War started so innocently on account of the assassination of the Crown Prince of Austria. I mean, it's not enough reason really to start a world war, but really. So when we then came to the United States, of course, I had 3 years of English and also 3 years of French, but as you know, there is a limitation. But we were lucky, we found jobs. It was directly after the Depression.
Let me back up a minute, so I'm sure we understand. So you and Lily, the May family came and they offered affidavits
Right.
for you and Lily.
Right.
And then you applied for immigration and you came to Nashville.
Right.
Okay.
That was our...
When was that?
That was in 1934. Arrived March the 2nd, 1934 in Nashville.
And when you came here, where did you live?
With our family.
Oh, you
They
lived
took us
with
in.
you lived with the May
we
family.
lived until the rest of my family came.
I see. So so now go on to say what you were doing. I'm going to come back to your family in a moment. But you and your sister then got work. You lived with Mortimer May
And Gertrude May. And we went to night school. We went to Watkins.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, what we were doing, they had a factory. We were assorting cards. Everything was done by what the people produced. You know, there was a card filled out, and this card that had so many items on had to be assorted. Maybe 5 or 6 different operations were on it. So that's the way we started out.
Did you work in the May hosiery mill?
No, in the office.
In the office.
My sister worked in the office too.
I see.
As I said, so.
Okay, to go back to what it was like for you in the hosiery mill. So you both worked in the office, and you were hoping meanwhile that the rest of your family would be able to come? Is that what happened?
Yeah, right.
And did they?
Yeah, they did come.
All of them?
In 1937 they came then, except my little brother who got...
Do you know when that happened, when he died?
No, there is no. Lots of things happen and there is no.
Okay. Did the remaining brothers and sisters, when they came, work in the hosiery mill too?
No, they went to school.
Oh, they did.
They went to school to finish their schooling. See, there was limitation in Germany, like my sister in the little town. She was a little, there's so much difference, age difference. And she said, when they sat down, and I were just 2 Jewish children in the class, and the teacher started in saying all kinds of terrible things about them personally, and just sent them home. So they didn't get much of an education, see. And there was no reason, and you couldn't do anything about it. With whom were you going to talk? Whom were you going to fight with? What? And then, and as I said, I don't know. Even the teachers, everybody just, see what happened. All the books and everything was written for the fascism, what's supposed to be taught.
Yes.
And there was no, and if you saw it different, you were afraid to get up and say, I differ with you. What is going to happen to you?
Yes. When the remaining members of your family came, was there anybody at all left in Germany other than your youngest brother?
I had, my aunt was in Camp de Gours in France.
De Gours.
My mother's only sister. And the way she came, they lived in a small town in Baden, and she had gone to see my grandmother, and she got a telegram she must come home immediately. And so they just packed up and they were sent. Camp de Gours was in France because they were on the other side of Germany. And so what actually happened then, she had what they call scaboot. When she came, she was just skin and bones through, not getting any food, and she was ill. She was very ill. And the way we had heard, it was the last ship out before the Second World War. And they came on a French freighter, which was going to Martinique, which was a French possession at this particular time. And the English took them prisoner at sea. You know, the war had started. And so they were then in Trinidad. And they didn't have any money, and we didn't know. They didn't take the francs in Trinidad because the franc didn't have any value. It was French money, which they had. So as it happened, she said, for the first time, she saw a bar of soap and a towel, which the English had given them to clean up on ship. And just accidentally, there was a German Jewish newspaper, which was started by immigrants, you know. And so my mother glances through the paper and she sees her name. She sees in the paper that they have become prisoners of, that the English took the ship prisoner. And so we got, I think, with the council in touch, and we brought them here to the United States.
I see. Did they come to Nashville?
Yeah, they came to Nashville. And they adopted a young boy, which was the nephew on his side, who was, the whole family perished, and he was the only one survived. See? And she came, but she was, through all this horrible experience, she wasn't the same. It looked like she never got over it. She just was sort of resigned. Life didn't mean anything. There wasn't any value. And how we accidental about this little boy. When the camp opened, some French nuns took some survivors in. And they came, and as they were in the camp, my aunt had said to her other relatives, give me your names and your date of birth. And we also just accidentally, there came a list out after the Second War that so many children were found by, staying with the nuns, and they did work on the farms all during the Second World War. There was that boy's name, and they had adopted him later.
So your aunt then brought the child to the United States?
And he was, I think he was 12 years old, this child. He was about that tall and totally, he had nothing to wear and totally malnutrition you could have seen. And so that was part of my, we were fortunate to get out before the Christennacht, at least my parents, got out. But now how we had a house, and the way they came and took our property away, they just came and confiscated our property before my parents left. And before you leave, you have to have everything in order. You can't leave except your taxes are paid and everything. You cannot even get a visa. Everything has to be in order. So he came, they called him, they can't leave. They were ready to leave, they can't leave. Some guy at the tax office gave him a little slip of paper, put a figure on, and said, you owe me this much, and don't you ever open your mouth about that. If you do not pay that, I will see that you will not leave Germany. See, people were so, just, I don't know, I think, so intimidated. I think a relative, or they got together and got the money together to help my parents to leave.
When your father and mother came here, did they set up a house? Did they have a business here?
No. My father worked as a butcher, and my mother was a housewife, and she took in other people, had a rooming house, and I used to see her work so hard, darning their socks. That's European. We Americans throw them away, washing, and I said, you're always washing and ironing, and cooking for them.
What differences, when you think back on it, what differences were there between your life in Germany as a family and your life in the United States, in Nashville, as a family?
Well, life was very hard in the small towns. As I said, either you had a farm or you were a small businessman. But we were 5 children, and things were, as I said, if I wore a dress and there was still some good parts in it, my little sister got a dress out of it. People were so, but I think maybe this is in general, as I said, we had our own milk, we had our own eggs. We lived in the country. We just like everybody else.
And here, was it harder or easier here?
Well, you know, when you have to leave your home, it's never easy. We were young, we were adaptable. I came to this country and I loved this country. I never forget, oh, they have such gorgeous stockings here. You know, when you're young, you can easily adapt. But when a family, everything in turmoil, you don't know the language, you have responsibility. So
So it was hard for your parents.
yeah, after all, like my mother said, I thought my children had a future in my country.
Yes.
See? But there is a great difference. Germany, you have to consider, has always been a powerful nation. And I can see very much what's happening now, you know, that all the nations around Germany are very much afraid. What if she is rising as a power? After all, if you have, when we then think about fascism, after all, fascism reached all over the world. It did not remain in Germany. Every country was in it. So we Americans need to think really very hard with what if that freedom is gone for everyone. Religion has very little to do with it. Of course, you point out certain people in order to get there. Point out the Jews, it could be the black men, could be. But if we are not on guard and freedom means something to us, as I say, there is danger everywhere.
So,
as I said, we didn't want to realize what is happening.
Mm-hmm.
We said, well, what could that man do to us? Like my father said, what could he do?
Speaking about Hitler.
Yeah, what could he do? I served my country. We are honorable people. What? Just my religion is standing in the way? Well, that's what we thought, because, you know, we were the evil of everything. The communism, we were the evil of communism. There was hardly any communists in Germany.
Mm-hmm.
Everything was done under pretense. When the Reichstag burned, you know, they did so much, it's unbelievable, unbelievable. Then there comes another thing. I lived in this small town. When you really we think about things like that. And one of my, this girl was a member of my family, but several generations back, she married a Christian young man in the small town. And she said, well, my husband is Christian. I have a future here. Believe it or not, they didn't. One night they came and they left the family. She and her husband and her 2 children left in a hurry. And she had sisters in the United States. They dug in people's past, in people's unbelievable.
So she was considered Jewish even though...
Well, yeah.
Yes.
Her father was the mayor of this little town.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, his father, I should say. And she and their children, and she had converted to Christianity. And she felt totally, she in her way is Christian. After all, she left her
religion.
Judaism and her religion.
Mm-hmm.
What can they do to me? But that didn't mean anything. That didn't mean a thing. So what I say, when it befalls a country, we all suffer.
Yes.
Some suffer more, others suffer less, but we don't know.
Yes. Let me come back to your family's life in Nashville in the United States. You said that you loved it and you felt at home here and just enjoyed it. Was that true for everyone in your family? Did everybody come to feel that they had made a good choice and feel happy in the United States?
Of course. When you know that you, like I said, many people come maybe as an immigrant to the United States and say, well, the United States is not for me, but I can go back. There was no return. And the United States, as I said, this individual freedom, worship as you please, go wherever you want to. And this was something, a totally new experience for us. Even you know, as I wanted to say, even when I really sometimes think back, one doesn't realize, when one is young, one doesn't think. When I went to the school, for instance, and the teacher had said something was pink, and the teacher had said, no, that's blue. I don't know whether I would have gotten up and said to him, Mr. Teacher, I think that isn't so. It was such a, how should I say, there isn't anything like it, you know. Everything, you had to be on time, you couldn't be tardy, you had to, everything, it's just a different nationality, a different people. And of course, if you grow up in this environment, you become like the people. Mm-hmm. As I said, I think I might have been afraid to oppose him in any way or form. Even it would have been correct to say.
I'm going to ask you one more question about the May family. Since they brought you here and they were relatives, did they continue to be helpful to you?
Yes. They brought hundreds of people over. So many, I think many of the people, of course, passed away.
Yes.
You know, you can imagine how many generations. My parents, mm-hmm. and then I and my husband, our children, and our grandchildren are here. It's basically 4 generations when you really think. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't swap this country for any country in the world.
Have you ever gone back to Germany?
No.
Do you ever want to?
No. I do not have to feel, I think the young people are innocent. But I couldn't be in good conscience go back and so much blood spilled. So much blood, unreasonable, you know. Mm-hmm. And people accused and turmoil. And what do I want to go back for? To think that, as I said, I don't have hate in my heart, but I couldn't go back and be very heartbroken.
Yes.
And be very heartbroken.
How do you think that your experiences before the war and then coming to this country as a young person affected you? Did they change you in any way, do you think?
Well, you know, yes, I think so. I have become Americanized in my thinking, in my way, in the love for this country. I appreciate the freedom and the opportunities people have, regardless where you come from and where you and what you believe. But you know, the system in Europe where I was born, if your father was a doctor, the son would have become a doctor. If your father was a farmer, you would have remained a farmer. If your father was a cobbler, you would have remained. There was strictly sort of like a caste-like, you know.
And there was more opportunity here?
Yes, it's a different country. It is made up of all kinds of people, and I think everyone has contributed something, and we have a choice. here. Education was not free in Europe. Everything was expensive. Books were expensive. The education had to be paid for. So you have so many opportunities in this country. Of course, I cannot speak about Germany. I'm gone since '34. What is today? Of course, we built all these countries up. The Americans built Germany up, built Japan up. You know, basically, it looks like they won the war.
Yes. Yes. How did these experiences did they affect the way you feel about being Jewish?
Oh, I'm absolutely secure in my faith. I respect everyone else. And I think regardless what's going to happen in life, it's going to happen. And it has happened to many people who were 3 generations ago converted to Christianity. They were just locked up like everybody else because they were not Aryan. Mm-hmm. And my Jewishness, I think I want to be an honorable person, a good person to all people, and it doesn't affect me in any way. And I respect everyone else's belief as long as they believe.
Do you think that your experiences before the war and then coming here as you did had an effect on the way you brought up your own children?
Well, one mistake, now I see that. We were so, what should I say, I couldn't quite express it. I think we were so disturbed about these conditions that we did not expose our children. And I think we didn't talk about it. We didn't want to talk about it, you know. We saw, maybe, as I said, we don't want to mar the future of our children, but I see today it was a mistake. We should have started to talk about these atrocities years and years ago, even to the world, I think. It is rather late to, maybe it isn't too late, for young people should learn in school what it really is. Do we expose our youth to know what it is and to realize it is as bad for them than it is for all.
Mm-hmm. You felt you didn't want to tell, you and your husband didn't want to tell your children because you wanted to protect them.
Yes.
But from what you're saying, that kind of protection in the end wasn't in their best interest. Is that right?
That's what, in all theirs and in all people. I think we should have, even after the Second World War, we never spoke what really had happened. People learned about when they came to the camps, mm-hmm. but there was no teaching in the world.
And you feel that lack. Did you see it in your own children, that lack of understanding?
No, I think they know that, you know, as we later, they got more mature, and we talked to the grandchildren, yes. But it's hard to be born in the United States and to understand Europe and the division in Europe, the different nationalities, the different people. The Italians are different than the Polish, mm-hmm. and each people, you can go to Germany, it's one nationality. You come to the United States, it's people from all over, which is good. And it is, as I said, and each country has a different standard, everything is different.
Yes.
You know, it's hard for them what I wanted to say. We are of German background. I'm sure we taught our children what we were taught in a way, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe they're teaching something different in a different country, in Italy. And when you have to realize when immigrants come, they have to live among themselves. It's not as much in Nashville. When I came to Nashville, we went to Watkins. Well, they had never heard people coming from abroad. But when you went to New York, there were Chinese, Japanese, Europeans, all nationalities. There was an Italian section, there was a Greek section, and even in the West Coast, because these are the ports of entry.
Yes.
And in order to facilitate things and to learn to understand, people live among themselves.
Are you saying that it was a problem for you when you went to Watkins, that people
No.
made you uncomfortable
No,
because you
never,
were?
never. As I said, people hadn't seen a European come in and settle in Nashville. Everyone settled at the port of entry.
see.
That's what I meant. I wasn't uncomfortable at all. But when we came, everyone wanted to talk to us and everyone wanted to see, you know. After all, we were it was different. Not many people came from different countries here when I came in 34.
Yes. Do you feel that Nashvillians, and perhaps particularly the Jewish community of Nashville, treated the German refugees well when they came?
Well, maybe I will decline to express my opinion about things like that. I think we weren't so affected by, because we lived with our relatives. Of course, you also have to understand youth can be very cruel.
Yes.
I don't care whether they're teenagers or what. We were lonely, yes. I agree, we were very lonely.
I'm sure.
Very lonely.
And missed the kind of groupings you would have had in Germany.
Yeah, well, but that's not, you know, of course, but you can do without that. I'd much rather live in the United States than there's no regrets on that part.
Let me ask you another question. How did you meet your husband? Did you meet him here?
My husband came from Austria, and he is an engineer by profession. But he had to work in a coal yard, repairing trucks for many, many years, because he couldn't speak the language properly. And he had a contract to go to Texas, and he worked on the docks in New York. And worked also, I think, as an auto mechanic for someone else. And he said he knew from the cowboys, you know, from the movies, and he wants to go to Texas. So work was hard to find. You went and bought a job, he told me, and you paid $3 and you maybe $9, and you know, and so he went outside of New York there, and he decided Texas is right for him, but he didn't have enough money for his ticket. So he goes there and goes to the bus, you know, and he asked the man, I want to go to Texas. And the man asked him how much money he had, and he said $15. And he said, well, that will take you halfway. So he came to Nashville. He had to have a couple of dollars, you know, something. And the war broke out, Second World War, when he came to Nashville. And as usual, everybody was welcome in our house. People came, had no home, no money, no nothing. We fed them. We had shifts where maybe we didn't have enough furnishing ourselves. Maybe 4 or 5 or 6 ate. Then my mother washed dishes and the others ate. So they all came and they stayed with us. We made do, and we never charged them anything. And that's why I think of my mother was just real good person. So, And he came from Austria. And one day somebody brought him to the house, and he ate with us. And my father couldn't get over it, how hungry he was. And so that was maybe 3 or 4 months later. And he was alone. He had no home. And he lived in a boarding house, and we met. And we met in October, and we got married in January.
Mm-hmm. Nice story.
And of course I worked and he worked. And as I said, he worked very, very hard. He was with the Frank's coal yard at that time.
Mm-hmm.
He kept their fleet. You know, they had people deliver coal, you know. I remember how Nashville had soft coal. And that's the way we started.
If you could, I don't know, if you could tell other people or have other people learn something from your experiences, what would you like them to remember?
Well, I would like for general public, are you referring?
Whoever would hear this story, what would you want them?
I would say that we as a people need to be wide awake. Whatever we dismiss, oh, like fascist is coming, oh, he is only crazy. Do not believe that. There is evil behind that. And there is so much untruth about it all. Let's examine it. And if we want to remain a free people, let's get together and do something about it while we can. See, we said, let this man come. What can he do? So it affects not only one part, it affects all peoples, regardless. We think we save ourselves. In the end, we don't. I think of that cruel Second World War. Here was a man who was destined. There were so many lives, and so many things happened. Give me this, give me that, I'm satisfied. So even a democracy can only survive if its people want it that way.
That's a good lesson. Is there anything I've neglected to ask you that you would like to say?
No. Well, not really, except, as I said, I'm now no youngster anymore, and I'm grateful that we did have the opportunity to come to this country. So many people perished. And for no reason other than their religion. And of course, among all peoples, and on the end, we all the same. We all want the same goal for ourselves, for our children, and maybe for all the world, to be this a better world. But as I say, who knows what's coming after? But if we do not talk what has been, we are also cannot expect the future
to be better. Thank you very much.